Welcome back to another MOTOBOB video, and you join me in the studio today with a bike I've really been looking forward to reviewing, the Tiger Sport 660 from Triumph. Now, some of you will remember that I owned the Trident 660 last year, which it shares its platform with, but also I was lucky enough to ride the prototype of this bike last summer from the Triumph factory on one of their local test routes. So look, I already thought it was going to be pretty good, and so in this video we'll go through all of the details. I'll tell you about all the pros and cons, and at the end I'll give you my verdict. Did it live up to my expectations? But before we get started, a massive thanks to Fowlers in Bristol for lending me their demo today. This one's just come in, it's ready to go, so if you fancy demoing a Tiger Sport 660, which I highly recommend you do, then do give them a shout. And I'd also like to say a big thanks to Beeline Moto for sponsoring the channel. It's a really good little navigation device that I use on pretty much all of my test rides, fits on any bike, and they do a Triumph branded version, which I've got on here today, and I think it looks pretty smart. Again, down in the description there's a link to my full review, as well as to their product page where you can find out more. Look, bikes in this crossover, tall rounder category really do have to be versatile, because you might want to do practical stuff with it, like commuting and motorway work and going to the shops. But look, you could just buy a maxi scooter to do that. The reason people don't is because you can have some proper good fun on this at the weekend and doing quicker riding. That's why I think this 660cc inline triple is awesome in this bike. On the one hand, they've given it plenty of mid-range and guts, so around town, even down at like 2,000 or 3,000 RPM, it really doesn't ever feel weak or like it's getting bogged down. They've also given it a very gentle throttle map that makes it really easy to ride at those low speeds, and you don't even feel like you have to slip the clutch much. You can pretty much ride it on the throttle. Now, when you look at the rest of the market, there's a lot of parallel twins, and one of the strengths of this engine is the smoothness. The evenly spaced firing intervals in this triple make it silky smooth, and that makes it really good for cruising on the motorway and A roads where vibrations can start to get a bit tiring. On top of that, they've given it a 17.2 litre tank, so again, good for distance work. Now, their claimed fuel consumption figures, you should get around 230 odd miles. I've been finding you get around 50 miles per gallon, so more like 200 miles on a tank, but still pretty good. And then lastly, when you do want to take it, you know, for a sporty spin, then it does like to rev up, and it makes about 80 horsepower. That's about 10, 15 more than some of the close competition, but it's also the way it makes it with that smooth feel to the engine and its eagerness to rev. You do have to get on top of it a bit with that gentle throttle response. You really have to start wrenching it to get it to liven up, but once you do, it's a very playful and fun engine. Possibly the biggest strength of this bike though, and I thought this when I rode the prototype, and I thought it again when I rode this bike today, is the handling. And the thing is, you might not expect that much from it. I mean, the hardware and the materials used, they're not top notch. It's a steel frame and swing arm, so not as light as the aluminium that you'd see on something like the Street Triple, but you know, it's built to a price. Brakes are from Nissan and they're just 2-pot calipers. And then yeah, you get Showa upside down forks and a Showa shock, but there's no adjustability apart from preload at the rear. But you know, Triumph obviously know how to make bikes handle, and this is a great example of a bike that uses affordable equipment and materials but has them set up in the right way. So yeah, like the brakes, the same as the Trident, I didn't think they were going to be much good, but you've got a pair of decent sized discs at the front, so 310mm each. Obviously some good pad selection and also some steel braided hoses. All of those are going to contribute to good braking power, and then you've also got an adjustable brake lever at the front so you can get it dialed into your liking. Genuinely, the braking performance is a lot better than I expected. And then the suspension, like I say, Showa upside down fork, Showa shock at the rear, non-adjustable, but I don't think I'd make any changes, certainly for solo riding, even if it was. I did a decent loop around the Mendips this morning, some good curvy roads, and despite the fact that it's a fairly comfy ride, it felt really nimble and agile and reassuring even if you start to push it quite hard. Another factor there will be the tyre choice, so Michelin Road 5s, very good, even in slightly slippy and greasy and gravelly conditions like we had on some of the roads today. But you know, that's all well and good it being great on twisty country roads, but what about 2-3 hours on the motorway like it's intended for? Well, clearly this is a much better choice than something like the Trident because you've got so much more wind protection. The tank sort of flares out here, and then you've got a nice fairing with a windscreen that's super easy to adjust one-handed while you're on the go. Look, it's not a gold wing, you still get buffeting above and around the screen, but for someone of my size, it keeps plenty off your body and keeps you much warmer than if you're on a naked bike. Now you can also get a handguard accessory and heated grip, so I'd be thinking about buying both of those if I was doing a lot of motorway work to keep your hands warm. Now another big factor in terms of comfort is the riding position, and I get on with this bike really well. The bars are wider than the Triumph, they're higher and further towards the rider. The seat's a little taller at 835mm, that's partly because of the suspension being taller, but also they've increased the leg room between the seat and the pegs. All in all, it makes for a bike that feels much bigger, much more substantial, much more roomy and more comfortable over time, but it's not at all intimidating. It's not a heavy bike. 835mm isn't super tall, and it's plenty narrow enough here to help you get your feet down. If you're still struggling, there is a low seat accessory that drops it by 25mm, so 810, which is almost as low as the Trident. Now I will say the seat isn't the most cushy, so anyone who likes a soft, squishy like gel seat might want to look into options, but it does have good space for a passenger, which is something that can't necessarily be said of the Trident. So yeah, there's much more room here. You've got some decent grab rails, and also the preload adjuster uses like a remote knob. That makes it so much easier to get the bike sitting level when you get a passenger or luggage on, because you don't need to get any tools out. Now look, I don't have any luggage on this bike because it's Fowlers demo, but you can get hard cases that are color matched. They look pretty good, and also a big top case. They say you can get a full face helmet in either side case, so it should be super practical. And then you've got this integrated mounting system, which you do see on other bikes, but still it does keep the back end looking very clean instead of having big supports for the panniers. All in all, it just feels like a very flexible motorcycle for not a massive amount of money, and everything seems pretty well thought out. My only reservation is that I do want to test it out with luggage and maybe a passenger and see how the suspension performs, because there's more adjustability on some of the competition, even the more affordable bikes, and that's there to compensate for all that extra load that you'll be carrying if you're fully loaded with a passenger. Now another one of my favorite features of this bike is the dash. You've got a really punchy and contrasty inverted LCD at the top half that gives you revs, speed, gear position, but in the bottom half you've also got a small color TFT. It's not a particularly big screen, but they've managed to pack in a lot of functionality. Not only can you use it to edit the riding modes and go through the menus and change the settings and then different displays of trip data, but if you upgrade to the optional Bluetooth module, that opens up phone connectivity so you can do media playback, turn-by-turn nav, calls and messages, and even control a GoPro. Now I had that installed on my Trident, which I owned last year, and I thought it was really good. The turn-by-turn nav is pretty similar to something like Beeline, to be honest. Easy to follow, and the My Triumph app is pretty decent as well. And I also occasionally on longer trips like to listen to like a podcast or music, and so being able to pause it from the switchgear is a great little extra piece of safety. You know, if you get to a situation where you really want to be hearing absolutely everything around you, then it's just a quick touch of a button. Elsewhere we've got LED lighting all round, and you get self-cancelling indicators, so one short press does 3 winks, so you can do like a lane change, but a long press is like fully on indicators that self-cancel after you've made the turn. In terms of riding modes, you've got road or rain, and they affect ABS, traction control and throttle map, and you can customize those riding modes through the menu. The other accessory worth mentioning is that you can get a quick shifter for this bike. Some people like them, some people not, but I think they give it a nice bit of sportiness, and overall I think you can see that you get a lot of value for money from this bike. The only 2 things that I kind of wish it had are firstly like a sporty riding mode just to liven that throttle up when you want it, and then also cruise control, which personally I don't think I'd buy a bike for motorway riding and touring now if it didn't have cruise control. Now Triumph really do their research with their customers, so I'm sure they've found that both of those features would just push the price up and they weren't really required by the customer. But still, the Trident seems to have attracted both beginner riders and more experienced because it's just such a good bike. And for that reason, it'd be great if they were offered as accessories so that you could pay for them if you wanted. Fairly minor qualms though, and I think for a lot of people those things won't be an issue. And what I do think they've absolutely nailed is the styling on this this bike? You know, firstly, I've got to say they've done a great job of giving this bike and the Trident their own personalities despite sharing a lot of their architecture. But even that aside, I just think it's a cracking looking bike. The front end is really distinctive and gives it that Tiger sportness. And I think especially in this red paint job with the silver side panels and front mudguard, it really does look great. I'm not as big a fan of the blue, which is pretty much entirely blue everywhere. There's a grey option, which is fine, but not remarkable. This though just looks brilliant to me. But as always, you know, it's personal taste, so let me know which one you'd pick down in the comments below. Paint aside, it is worth mentioning the finish, because at this price point you might expect them to cut a few corners, but look at stuff like this little logo on the front mudguard. You've got the same on the filler cap there, a nice quality to stuff like the bar clamp and the triple clamps, more Triumph badging on the engine cases, and it's all those little things that prevent what is a fairly competitively priced bike from looking at all cheap. I don't think you could say that at all about the looks of the Tiger Sport 660. Now let's talk about the price. It starts at $8,450, which is a little more than stuff like the Tracer 7 and the VERSYS 650. Now I've already ridden those three bikes back to back as a bit of a group test, so I'll publish a video soon with a lot more detail, but to me the price looks pretty fair for this bike. So look, did it live up to my expectations? Well, I already knew pretty much what it was going to ride like, and it definitely feels great on the road. I guess when you ride the prototype, you're thinking, well, have they given it like really aggressive brake pads so they feel good, but they won't last for long? Or are they putting more fuel in and the fuel economy's not that good, but it feels really lively? I don't think Triumph would really ever do that to me. That would be pretty harsh, but I can say categorically today that this feels just as good as that prototype on the road. The thing that takes it up a notch is like that bike was still being finished. The windscreen was like 3D printed. It had the camo paint job on it as well. And with this bike here right now, I can see that the level of fit and finish and the choice of paint and stuff like that is typical Triumph. It really does look good in the flesh. I think you could argue that for the Trident and the Tiger Sport, this is some of Triumph's best work. It's not got all the features, it's not their fastest bike, but it just shows what they can do when they're constrained by a budget. They've delivered so much in terms of the riding experience and the feature set, and yet managed to keep it super competitive. Hats off to Triumph, and if they're bringing more bikes on this platform, then I can't wait to see what they come up with next. As always, I'd love to know what you think of it down in the comments below. Leave any questions, and when I get the press bike for a little bit longer, I'll try and answer them then. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.